Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. And if you live in Canada like I do, or if you live in BC, which is also where I live, you will certainly be aware that there is a public narrative, an ongoing awareness of quite a serious problem, I would say, of missing and murdered Aboriginal girls. Now, about every month I see a newspaper headline talking about this, so it's not something that has low level of awareness. It's very high awareness, and there is now a public inquiry being formed to try to address this problem. Well, last night I went and attended a panel discussion presented by Cafe, on which there was Dr. Adam Jones, who's an academic at Okanagan University, and Chief Ernie Cray, who is a social worker and a coastal chief and honestly a bit of a politician, who are both serious professional guys trying to get this inquiry to include not just missing and murdered Aboriginal women, but also missing and murdered Aboriginal men. Well, why would we want to include them? Well, because there's more than twice as many of them as there are women who go missing and murdered. So that's kind of peculiar, isn't it? I mean, we have been hearing about the missing and murdered Aboriginal women problem in the newspaper and elsewhere year after year, month after month. Always the tragedy of missing and murdered Aboriginal women, and it is a tragedy. But almost nobody who hasn't directly become involved in this question has any awareness that there's a man problem too, and it's twice as big as the woman problem. There are twice as many. What the hell's going on here? How come whenever I see a newspaper article about the missing and murdered Aboriginal women, oh my God, the tragedy, there's not a single word about the missing and murdered Aboriginal men. It's almost as if nobody cares if you die and you're a man or an Aboriginal, or double word score for fuck you, both. And in fact, although I'm not a part of the Aboriginal community, I feel a very sharp message to me whenever I see one of these newspaper, like front page newspaper talking about missing and murdered Aboriginal girls, because I know that the missing and murdered Aboriginal men, there's twice as many of them, 2 times. So when we talk about the girls, we're talking about 1/3 of the problem. And I'm pretending the other 2/3 doesn't exist, and the message is unambiguous. The message is, your life doesn't fucking matter. We don't care. But the panel discussion that I went to see last night, featuring Dr. Adam Jones and Chief Ernie Cray, is trying to get the public inquiry to include men and boys into the question. Well, obviously, right? Because if you go to a structure fire as the fire department and you only spray water on one wall, only north walls that are burning get water sprayed on them, well then every single structure fire you attend is going to burn fully to the ground. You're not even going to protect the walls that you spray. That's the approach being taken by the missing and murdered Aboriginal girls if they don't include men and boys. They're not going to solve any single part of the problem. So at least there are a couple people trying to actually encompass the whole problem. But I am somewhat disheartened to discover that Dr. Adam Jones, who has been studying this for 20 years, is using a framework of human rights to frame the question. He's talking about this in the rhetoric of human rights. Well, in human rights, you always have a story. You have a group with victim identity who are subjugated or oppressed or harmed in some way. And you also have an oppressor, aggressor, violent, evildoer group. In human rights, the evildoers are always the men. Now, I don't mean in reality the evildoers are always the men. I mean in the story of human rights. Whenever you talk about human rights, you create a narrative, and that narrative has bad guys in it, and the bad guys are always the men. So if you're supposedly trying to help men who have gone missing or are being murdered, how in the fuck can you fucking solve any problem using a framework that makes men the bad guys? I asked Dr. Adam Jones this question in slightly less pointed language than that. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, and have a lovely day. Okay, so I uploaded that video. The one that you just watched, this is actually the second version of it. I uploaded it the day before and took it down. Why? Well, because the conclusions I came to that video I felt were too dark for my channel. And I'll tell you what they were. I went to that panel discussion very optimistic, thinking that this quite serious problem was going to finally encompass the people most affected by it. And after sitting through the panel and listening to the speakers and asking them some questions, I came away convinced that they were cynical, profiteering hustlers there to make a buck off the corpses of young men. That's a pretty pessimistic and dark conclusion. Thought about it a little more, and I realized maybe that's the right message to send. Maybe young men need to see that very clearly, need to be completely disabused of any illusion that anybody gives a shit if they die. Young men, particularly young men in a marginal community like the Aboriginal community. Young guys, if you die, if you go missing, if you come to a gruesome end, nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. Your corpse only has value as a fundraising tool to a cynical, profiteering social worker or an academic looking for funding. That's all you're worth. So, is that too dark? Or maybe you need to know that to take matters into your own hands, to take control of your life into your own hands and stop listening to people selling you a false prospectus that you will go sacrifice yourself for their benefit, that you will go choose a dangerous or early fatal job or sacrifice your happiness for somebody else's while your life doesn't fucking matter to them. Maybe what you need to be told very sharply and slapped right across the face is the reality that your life has no value to anybody except yourself. And so choose your decisions and your path based on that. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and as always, have a lovely, lovely day.